people, I need to share that I'm Patricia McDonald, director of the Wichita Art Museum, because we have a couple of new faces in the crowd, and that's spectacular. I just love this turnout. I know I've been talking with many of you, and we've had shared anticipation for this evening's speaker, really learning that much more of a behind-the-scenes story for this epic new American Art Museum that's risen in the Northwest. And I've been looking forward also to reconnecting with a friend and a former co-worker, but we're going to circle back to that in a second, because I want to start with a number of acknowledgments and special welcomes. We have James Clendenin and his wife Amy from the Wichita City Council joining us this evening. Actually, we believe Pete Meitzner and his wife Susie are sort of en route. There's a big reception where they all needed to be, and they must have had fabulous wine over there because it's taking them a little bit to transition across town. At any rate, I am really thrilled to welcome you to the building and the museum this evening. Because we, and you see our patron group, like you, are very devoted to service to this city. Ours has a special twist. We're eager to find the way that we really deepen the quality of life of this city, and we do that by the different kind of very meaningful encounters, one-on-one with original works of art. And when not that, amazing programming like this evening, speakers from elsewhere, but artists and films and concerts. And I'm happy to share with you that in this past year, our attendance has increased by 13%. And I would tell you 13% and going. And I don't often get the opportunity to sort of brag about ourselves in front of a city council member, so I'm going on a little bit here. The museums on the river collectively got together and we did a teacher appreciation evening, and the follow-up for that in terms of the increase in requests for school tours has just been phenomenal. So I don't have a statistic on that, but I happen to know just by watching our staff run sort of ragged with the kids around here, that also has been going. I want to acknowledge with you here, James, the fabulous patrons that you are sharing this room with. It's because they have had good fortune in their life, and they are prescient and want good fortune to befall other people. And so they dig into their own pockets to support this museum so that those kinds of experiences are possible for all the different people, all the diversity that live here in Wichita. So I have such great admirations for our patrons. I need to also acknowledge, sir, in addition to fabulous city leaders and great patrons, we have another person in the auditorium this evening that we want to recognize and acknowledge. It's not every day that an international art star, who just so happens to be a native son, comes back to town. So artist Tom Otterness is at the very rear of the auditorium. And this is just one of those fabulous serendipitous stories. Part of what brings him back to Wichita into the region is that he is working on a commission, or he's working on an installation with the Crystal Bridges Museum of Art. So if you see Tom and Rod taking notes later, we know what that's about. I also want to just give a shout out to the people who recently were on the Murdock Society trip, and particularly to Bud and Tony Gates. I'm sort of looking to find them. Okay, our own king and queen of the Murdock Society. She orchestrates all the things that occur in town, and Bud is the ringleader for our trip. You know, typically it does not happen in art museums that it is the volunteers themselves who coordinate everything. We are so gifted here. So 39 of us traipsed all over New England, had spectacular time, wonderful weather, just amazing museums and artist houses and art nestled in the landscape. It was really wonderful. Other people who were on the trip committee, I want to acknowledge because they do such hard work, include John Carnahan, Angela Gibbs, Norma Griever, Amy Moeller, Nancy Martin, and Leslie Wilson. So we're just all back. Barely on our feet because it was so much fun. It turned out to be strenuous. Okay, so now we circle to Rod Bigelow. And Rod, sorry, didn't really mean to put you on the spot with so many luminaries of the Wichita audience, but pressure just went up. I would like to start by telling you that it was many years ago at this point that I came up for the perfect adjective for Rod, and it was actually when someone who was considering hiring him called me as a reference, and that word is sterling. Rod is just one of the better museum workers in the United States today. He and I met when we were both working in Tacoma, and we had, some of this might be a little on the personal side, we had a real roller coaster opening a brand new building by the architect Anton Predek. When you open a new art museum, it's not only that you're opening the building, but then you have to get the whole collection there, and then you have to have everything out, and of course you want everything absolutely perfect, and you know, nothing, everything on your list does not go perfectly. There were days when you know, the staff was really at the end of a rope, and Rod was so fabulous because his wife is a nurse. And he would, you know, he did this brilliantly. He would calm us all down, and he would look us in the, you know, around the room, look us in the eye. No one died today. It's okay. It was very effective on all of us. At any rate, he holds an MBA from Pacific Lutheran University, which is in the state of Washington, and he's a graduate of the Getty Institute's Museum Leadership Institute. He was the chief financial officer during his not quite a decade in Tacoma. He then moved to Seattle, and he was the director of administration and financial services for really a premier art school. It's called the Seattle Art Institute in Seattle. Don Bacigalupi plucked Rod for the post of chief operating officer for the Toledo Art Museum. And Don was the person with whom I was on the phone saying that Rod is absolutely sterling. Don Bacigalupi then shifted to become the director at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And who did he, a couple of months later, charm into moving to Bentonville to become the deputy director for operations and administration? Well, that would be none other than our speaker this evening. Rod oversaw the final construction at Crystal Bridges, as well as all the kind of logistical challenges for something, especially on that scale. This is a different story. Rod has now, this was his third museum building that he was opening, but very different because he was launching a whole new institution at the same time. I was quizzing him. Within a month, he hired 100 people. You have to ask him over dinner exactly how you do that. But they expected about 200,000 people, you know, roughly, give or take, in their first year, but they attracted 650,000. This last summer, 20 months into their, you know, new life in the facility, they welcomed their 1 millionth visitor. So it's just been a success beyond success. And Crystal Bridges is the vision and the dream for Alice Walton. She's on the Forbes list of the top 20 billionaires in the world. And I thought it was interesting that she shares that top 20 with a sister-in-law and 2 brothers. Clearly, with that kind of fortune, she could do absolutely anything that she wanted, and she determined to build one of the world's premier American art collection and gift it to her hometown, Bentonville, Arkansas. And Rod is taking us through the story this evening of that vision, of its creation, of her priorities for the collection, the paths that she took, and perhaps as well some of the personalities who were on that incredible ride with her. Please help me to welcome someone that I consider a rising star across the landscape of American art museums, Rod Bigelow.
Okay, this is when the lights come on, and the lights go down in the back. Look at that. That's a lot to live up to, Patricia. She gave away all my thunder as well, but I am so excited to be here tonight. This is my first visit to Wichita, but I know that many of you have already been to Crystal Bridges, so I may be calling on you from time to time to answer a question or so. Like Patricia said, I had an opportunity to come to Crystal Bridges really to do the trifecta in the museum world, which is build a collection, build a building, and build an institution at the same time. And I was there when we went from 20 employees to 200 in just a matter of three months. So it was a bit of a crazy ride, and I was telling someone earlier that we call them Crystal Bridges years, which is sort of like a dog year. And so it feels like I've been there for 20 or so years. But I'm going to walk you through a little bit today, and I've left some time at the end for questions and answers because I know that I will not cover the juicy details that Patricia just talked about. So, Crystal Bridges. Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art opened on November 11th, 2011. Its arrival in the national art scene garnered a certain amount of attention, not only because it's the first major national museum focused on American art to open in a generation, but also because it features the innovative architecture and design of renowned architect Moshe Safdie. Yay. Of course, you have a wonderful Moshe Safdie building right here, and when I arrived in Wichita, I drove straight over and checked it out. And it's amazing that Moshe clearly plucked some wonderful things from that building and put them right into our building. So it's a wonderful, wonderful building. And also because we have an impressive collection, which provides a survey of great American art from colonial times to the present. It's located here in Bentonville, Arkansas. Everyone knows Bentonville, right? It's 1,555 miles from Los Angeles, and it's 1,284 miles from New York. It's probably not in the epicenter of the art world. But by now, most of you are familiar with some of the aspects of our story. Crystal Bridges was founded by Alice Walton, whose father, Sam Walton, created and built Walmart. The original Five and Dime here is located on the town square, and it's in charming downtown Bentonville. In fact, my daughter works there, so it's charming for me now too. It's her first job. It's her first job, thankfully. Today, it continues to be the headquarters of the world's largest retailer, located right here. Alice and her brothers grew up here. They spent much of their childhoods playing in this place, in these hills, creeks, and forests, the land that now makes up Crystal Bridges' 120-acre campus. Alice loved and made art from a very young age. Her first acquisition is here. This is not actually it, because she's lost it in her lifetime. But it was a Picasso print that she bought from her father's store. She saved up 4 weeks to buy this, and her investment of 25 cents really started her collecting future. Let's just say as an adult, her love grew. Her love of art grew, and her collection became rather more sophisticated. She was particularly, I keep on puh-ing, sorry. She was particularly fascinated with American art because of her abiding interest in and study of this nation's history and its people. Considering how art enriched her own life, Alice wanted to share that experience with others. She felt that great works of art should be accessible. Accessibility is at the center of our mission. It should be accessible to everyone, not just those that happen to live in an urban metropolitan area. And when she was thinking about this, she really thought about that being the two coasts, i.e. the map I showed you of New York and LA. She proposed the idea to her family, who embraced the project and set the wheels in motion to build a museum on land near downtown Bentonville that had formerly belonged to the family. From the beginning, Crystal Bridges wanted to be distinguished by its focus on education. Education is at the core of everything that we do. It's at the core of our mission, and it's simply, it's in our blood. It's vital that Crystal Bridges be recognized as a welcoming place, a place where everyone would feel comfortable. With so few museums in the region and in the area, many people from our community would have never been to an art museum, and many not even to a museum at all. We had to break the stereotype of an art museum, which many people have. They have a feeling of a rarefied opportunity that you have to have a PhD in art history, or you have to have some sort of elite attitude to be able to come to a museum, and that was what we were very focused on overcoming. And foremost, we have to have volunteers and employees that were friendly and welcoming, and also gave a very high-quality experience. This is the landscape. It was so important to respect the landscape with the museum. Alice's notion was that this museum would bring together her two loves, art and nature, to create the ideal venue for the enjoyment of art. She began to seek an architect who could realize this vision. Here he is, Moshe Safdie. After visiting museums around the world and the nation, Alice decided to speak with Moshe Safdie, the architect who designed the National Gallery of Canada, the Skirball Center in Los Angeles, and the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, seen here. She arranged to meet Safdie on a visit to this very open Ozark space. She had a great adventure with him, falling through the water on a freezing January morning, and Moshe fell in and out of the water, freezing, and at the end of their visit, he asked her, "I'd love to be involved in your project. How can I be involved?" And she said, the selection process is over and you're it. So he clearly had the tenacity to not only understand her vision, but also to execute a good Ozark walk through the woods. This is Safdie's sketch. Safdie explored the property and fell in love with the landscape. This is basically a napkin drawing after his visit that was inspired by the Faye Jones house that was designed for the family just south of the museum property. And he proposed this building that, many of you have been there, but that spanned waterways through these bridges that this is almost exactly like it's designed today, so it's very interesting that he can have a vision like that. But it was very important that the space be very, very integrated with nature and look as if it had been there for years and years. In 2005, construction began on the site, and at the same time, national attention was drawn to Crystal Bridges' project as the art world became aware of something that was happening down yonder. Okay, I'm not very good at that. I'm from Seattle, so I've almost got the y'all, but not quite. So these are just some image of the construction site. Like I said, if you're obviously familiar with your Safdie building, it's very much the same. And then this happened. With the purchase of Kindred Spirits by Asher B. Durand from the New York Public Library, some were dismayed that the work would be removed from New York City to be ferreted away in all of places, Arkansas. Alice Walton was decried as a culture vulture, swooping in and grabbing priceless works of art to hide them away in her vanity project. The implication that was, if art was moved to Arkansas, nobody would see it, because who in Arkansas, or anywhere west of the Mississippi or east of the Rocky Mountains, could possibly have an interest in art? This, of course, was exactly the reason why Crystal Bridges was built where it was. Nevertheless, Crystal Bridges was indeed a grand experiment. The eyes and scrutiny of the art world were upon us. Could a national art museum make it in Middle America? Could there be an audience for art outside of metropolitan centers? Certainly that's been shown to be the case in other institutions, but it was not known yet in Bentonville. And spoiler alert, the answer is yes. I'll tell you that later, but let's talk about the collection. It began with the personal collection of Alice Walton, a core group of some 100 works, many on long-term loan to the museum. The majority of the collection had been acquired thereafter with the support of the Walton Family Foundation and others, with professional guidance and a museum vetting process. Alice's focus was very much on 19th century work early on, and that's where her passion was, and that has certainly grown since then. And I'll just talk a little bit about a couple of these images because they're some of Alice's favorites. Mauer is her favorite, and this is our good friend. We almost treat her as an employee at this point, Jean. And she has this amazing facial feature that is somewhere between evil and growling, and this dead bird on her house and on her hat and a cigarette in her hand. And she kind of characterizes the grit of the institution to some degree, even though we don't display that when we welcome guests. Very different painting than what the world had seen to that point of women. This is an interesting Thomas Moran because it was a Moran that had been lost. It had been acquired and no one knew where this Moran was. And for years, there was a search out, and guess what? It was in Arkansas. It was not in Alice Walton's collection, but in a collection that was 10 miles south of where the museum exists today. A family had purchased it and put it above their sofa and had it for years and years and years. And when the museum was announced, they came forward and said, we want to give this to the museum. So it's a beautiful, amazing painting, acquired very interestingly. And this great work from 1852, which really has a sensual feeling to it. Many of these works were collected by those early in the process. Important contributions were made on a foundational level by several individuals, including Bob and Liz Workman, Crystal Bridges' first director and registrar. Their contribution in the early stages set the course of everything that was to come. So they were on the very founding stages of the museum. The collection is arranged chronologically. So walking through the galleries offers a walk through American history as interpreted by its artists. Each work in our collection has its own part to tell the story. Of course, this one has a great story. This is a wonderful tape from 1856, which just came back from Paris, where it was featured not only on their homepage on their website, but we kept on seeing images of the French acting like bears and hunters on the internet, because many of them think that's really what America is like still. But this is such an interesting portrait because it displays, or not a portrait, an image, because it displays this bear and this hunter at this relative standoff. And seemingly unaware is his colleague in the background who's shooting the wrong direction. So you wonder what could possibly be back there that would be worse than what's happening here. I just don't know. Everyone sees this guy, right? I don't know if they're going to be friends after this. Many critics and naysayers insisted that the museum founded in the 21st century could never acquire a collection that was important enough to show, and that most of the great works had already been in collections that were inaccessible at this point. This is a great, great image. This actually, to some degree, so Tom, I'll give you a head start. Tom is doing this great project that I'll show a little bit later, but this Tom reminds me of the work that you're doing. But this is a wonderful Return of the Gleaner image of we have a strong tour, a strong women's tour at the museum that she is prominently featured in. It's such a resolute image. The benefit of being in a museum, however, even though people didn't believe that we could do the collecting, is we have a sizable endowment. Patricia. And that's not all. Our acquisition process is a little bit more flexible than and agile maybe than other institutions have. We're able to have we do have a very definite procedure, but when we have an acquisition that's important, we're often able to make decisions very quickly. These are a couple examples of them. This Tomic, many of you may know the Gross Clinic story, Tomic Akins, that was attempted to be acquired and was unsuccessful. And this is not a booby prize. This is an amazing image of Professor Benjamin Howard Rand and his cat that is a superstar in our gallery. And then a wonderful John Singer Sargent from 1878 when he was something like 23 years old. So he was a master painter from the very beginning. Most importantly, we are less bound by storied and academic notions of the canon. We're able to view each work of art on its own merits rather than as part of a checklist or a must-have list. We have a strategic plan for collecting, and we have the agility to respond to the opportunities that they present themselves. This is a not so great image of a bellows excavation at night, which is stunning. We do have criteria for acquisition. Very specifically, each must be able to contribute to the collection as a whole. This is a dove. John Wilmerding, the Serafin Professor of American Art at Princeton, has played a major role in guiding the collection's development. Being one of the senior statesmen in the field of American art, John has held steadfast to acquiring works meeting only the highest quality, and has worked to orchestrate a collection that could eventually rival those compiled over a century or more. Our criteria demands that the work should delight the eye. And by delight the eye, I don't necessarily mean be beautiful. This object, maybe you wouldn't imagine as being beautiful. It must create interest. It must arouse curiosity and generate that spark that attracts the viewer. It might deal with difficult subjects or not. Oops, too far. It might utilize media that creates that spark, that magical spark, but it must first catch the eye. CDR. Great works must engage the mind, make us think. They generate curiosity, cause us to ponder what they mean, perhaps, or what's happening in the work, or what societal or historical pressures may have helped engender the work. And this is part of the reason the education piece is such a strong part of Crystal Bridges. Once we've caught a guest's eye, our next job is to help them to make the next step. In everything we do, from gallery labels to guide training to audio tour scripting, we're finding points of connection, ways to help our visitors engage with the art. This is an amazing Carrie James Marshall, which is about, 10 feet tall by 15 feet long, that captivates children and adults alike because it's so intriguing. Let's see if this works. And finally, the criterion that the work of art must appeal to the heart. It's the most difficult, the most elusive, and the most personal. This one may or may not appeal to your heart. But it's about an emotional response. Maybe I'll play that again. It goes beyond engagement to connection, to internalization. This is not something you can create artificially. It has to come from within. But if we do our jobs laying the foundation of those other items that I talked about, then we open the opportunity to others to have this happen. And this brings me back to the question that Patricia already answered. There is an audience for art in Northwest Arkansas, definitely. And resoundingly, there is an audience. In our first year, Crystal Bridges, like Patricia said, we've welcomed 650,000 guests, and in August, we passed 1 million visitors, which is amazing and frightening at the same moment when we had planned for a fraction of that. They came from every state in the nation, and from several countries abroad. Some 60% of our visitors come from Arkansas and come from the region. An additional 20% come from our neighboring touch states, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana. These are exactly the people that the skeptics said would not come. And this is a crazy map that shows the density of where people are coming from. So when you look at the coast, they are definitely coming from the coast, but they're coming from the center of the country, all the way from the Twin Cities, all the way down to southern Texas. We've also hosted visits from 30,000 school children. Most of the school children had never been to an art museum before, and many of them had never been to any museum of any kind before. We're only beginning to discover what the impact of this type of educational experience, this type of enrichment, will be on an entire generation of kids. We recently completed a study that will be of very interest to you, a study with the University of Arkansas to assess the impact of a one-time art museum visit for students. Researchers interviewed students in both treatment and control groups to gauge their impact in terms of knowledge, comfort level with art, and likeliness to return. Seems like a basic list of things you'd expect to happen. Intriguing results revealed increases in historical empathy, the idea that I understand what it was like to live in the Civil War time, that I understand to some degree more about what it might have been like to live in the 19th century or 18th century. It increased critical thinking skills and the likelihood to return, but also the knowledge acquisition process and retention process. And the most interesting part about this is that it was accentuated in students that were from rural communities, those that were outside of metropolitan areas, those that had not been exposed to this kind of thing before. So Crystal Bridges has impacted our community in other ways as well. Tax revenue is significantly up in the county, as is occupancy rates in hotels. Some of you have stayed at the new 21C Hotel, which is right next to the museum and brand newly built. An institution like Crystal Bridges also generates a lot of creative energy. So we've seen the development of galleries and different kinds of art activities and art groups develop throughout this community. Even the State Department of Tourism has changed the state's logo from Arkansas as a natural state to Arkansas as a natural and cultural state. So they're jumping on the bandwagon. We've made an impact. But perhaps the best indicator is the success of Crystal Bridges. The best indicator of the success of our institution is not in the numbers or figures, but in responses we've received from our community members at large. I'll quote one of them. "Without question, the painting that I must visit each trip to Crystal Bridges is The Indian and the Water Lily by George DeForest Brush. This masterpiece is a mystery that begs to be solved, and each time I view the painting, I get a different impression. Could this just be a reflection of my mood each time, or is this painting speaking to me from 1887? I cannot say, but I know that I will see it again the next time I visit and look at the warrior's profile as he reaches for the water lily and wonder." It's those kind of responses that are amazing and are gratifying for our team. So yes, there is an audience for art in Northwest Arkansas. Of course, we have to keep them engaged. So where will Crystal Bridges go from here? First of all, we keep collecting. Today, we have approximately 2,400 objects in the collection, and we continue to play an active role in the art market at every level. Our recent acquisitions include a focus on post-war work with some notable exceptions, and I'll walk through a few of these for you now. This is Andy Warhol's 1977 Hammer and Sickle. What's been really interesting about this object is that we have learned that kids don't know that there was a Cold War. And you can teach all day long about the Cold War from this image from Warhol. And this was a purchase at auction. So we acquire things in many, many different ways. This is Keith Haring two-headed figure, which was donated by a family outside of Arkansas to the museum. And you can't really get the scale here, but it's about 12 feet wide by about 7 or 8 feet tall. And it's aluminum and installed outside on our landing. This is Donald Judd that was acquired in a private sale. The picture does not do it justice, I promise you. But it serves as a really wonderful anchor in our modern and contemporary gallery space. Okay, this is something that has not been announced yet. So I'm going to get in trouble by showing it to you. But oh well, you can all keep a secret, right? Yeah. So we just purchased this from the artist Jeff Koons himself, and it's called Hanging Heart. It's a steel object that is 8 feet wide by 9 feet tall and weighs 3,600 pounds. It's a really magnificent object, and we have to figure out where to hang it. Sometimes our acquiring gets ahead of our brains, so it's really exciting to see this kind of work enter the collection and for us to be able to share it with the broader community. Many of you may have heard about our recent acquisition of Edward Hopper's Blackwell's Island. This is a large scale for Hopper painting. You have an amazing one here that I'm drooling over, but it continues to contain the sort of vacant feeling that Hopper portrays in his work, but it has this wonderful lush riverfront in front of it, and the image doesn't pay it justice. It's a vibrant blue, really terrifically amazing, which we bought at auction. A different way that we've acquired work, this is John Trumbull's work, Portrait of Alexander Hamilton. Of course, the Founding Fathers are integral to telling the American story. And this was at the museum when we opened and part of the gallery experience. And it was recently gifted by Credit Suisse to both Crystal Bridges and the Metropolitan Museum, and we'll share the object. So it will go back and forth from time to time based on needs. So it's a wonderful gift that will be shared by both institutions. We also have a library, which is open to the public, and although it's not a circulating library, it contains wonderful things. Over 55,000 objects, 1,200 which are color plate books. The genres range from general natural history, early American exploration, materia medica, and others. And we certainly count these as part of our collection because they provide not only wonderful imagery, but also they provide great background and support and scholarly research opportunities to delve into our collection further. Over 42,000 objects were acquired from 2 collections between 2005 and 2006. Many of them art reference books, monographs, and artists and museum and gallery exhibition catalogs. However, there are also many museum bulletins and periodicals, ephemera. We have not come close to going through all of it at this point because they were acquired as 2 very large collections. This is one of the very most interesting ones. This is really odd medical equipment from the Civil War. And it's both whimsical and terrifying at the same moment. because I can't possibly figure out what would you do with all of those things. But it's a great. Someone thinks they know out there. Okay, well, tell. Don't tell me how until after dinner. We also acquired approximately 1,400 19th century manuscripts that were acquired, primarily made up of letters by the hand of Winslow Homer. So we have a great opportunity to research in that regard with Homer, but these were some great examples of the work. This is, obviously the material ranges greatly. My personal favorite is this bath soap color plate, which was from a copper plate and likely hand-colored. And it was used to sort of sell your wares on the road. So you would show these lovely bath soaps and hopefully make a sale. Patricia was asking me about Louis Villarreal while we walked through and saw one of his objects in your galleries today. The museum is very active in temporary exhibitions, a temporary exhibition program on our grounds. We've got 120 acres to play with, and it seems like that's not enough already. But this is Louis Villarreal's Buckyball, which first made an appearance at Madison Square Park in New York City. It's a wonderfully animated object that's LED tubes, never the same sequence. And when you talk to the artist, he describes it as a digital campfire. So you see down here, there are these wonderful zero gravity benches that are always filled with people watching the work and sort of being mesmerized by it. But it's really seemed to have brought our community together to enjoy the experience and then reflect on it with each other. It's a great community building thing. Then we have these great characters. So Macon Hay is a project by Tom Otterness. It is actually being installed as we speak. Tom has worked with us for a few months, probably a year, to make this happen. These great objects are perfectly suited for our community. They are right at the entrance. This is not where they're located. This is a different spot because they're obviously not up yet. But they're a great community culturally they're a great example of something that can connect really directly with our community. And they should be complete by Sunday if the weather holds up. Right, Tom? Oh, maybe today. That'd be great. They're really terrific. And Tom can tell you the story about how they came about later, but it's a great example of how we will work with our grounds. We also work in partnership with other institutions to develop relationships and extend our audience, bringing crystal bridges to the world and the world to Bentonville. We've established multi-year partnerships with the Louvre, the High Museum Atlanta, and the Terra Foundation of American Art, in which we develop small exhibitions that travel between partners. We are on the third of 4 at this point, and it is focused on portraiture, and they travel about, and we get to have the Crystal Bridges name at the Louvre, which is kind of exciting, and it's a really great partnership. And we hope to do that with more mid-size and smaller institutions around the country. Education is key, and as I mentioned before, it's central to everything that we do. By educating our visitors, we increase the engagement with art and their involvement in the museum, in their communities, and in their families. My favorite picture. By educating children, we are helping to ignite the spark that could inspire the next generation of artists and art lovers. In response to local demand, our education team is required to double the amount of school tours that we have within the next 3 years. So that will be a bit of a challenge, but they're up to it. We'll continue the exciting schedule of temporary exhibitions traveling from other institutions. This is an image from the William S. Paley collection, which is will be on loan to us beginning spring of 2014 from MoMA before it goes back to MoMA for good and is integrated into their collection. And we'll mount exhibitions that are from our own collection. This top exhibition is a wonderful wonderful exhibition of photographs and paintings and prints from the Depression, and really strong. And on the lower section, this is the Stieglitz collection, which will debut at the museum soon. It's a shared collection between Crystal Bridges and Fisk University. And just note this object here, and I'll come back to it in a minute. So yet another interesting episode in the museum's collecting history. In 2012, 50% or half of the Stieglitz collection was acquired by the museum in a collection agreement, collection sharing agreement. Here we have the iconic image from Georgia O'Keeffe, the Radiator Building from 1927, which is a great example of one of the works in the collection. The 101 object collection was originally given to Fisk University in 1949. O'Keeffe split up Stieglitz's collection, which numbered in the hundreds, and gave portions to 6 institutions: the National Gallery, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the Library of Congress, and of course to Fisk. So Fisk received 101 objects that O'Keeffe specifically chose for them. As an effort to solidify Fisk and to share the collection more broadly across the country, the museum purchased the work, or a share of the work, and will exhibited for the first time on November 9th. This is a really terrific Hartley that Patricia could probably talk about all day. But it has a wonderful painted frame that I'm sure she could tell another story about. But it's a great example of some of the stellar work in the collection. The collection is a wonderful tool to tell the story of American modernism, and it also offers an opportunity to explore the relationship between O'Keeffe and Stieglitz. Here we have a non-American. So this collection marks the first time that non-American works will enter the museum's collection. It includes artists that represent those Europeans that influenced American modernism at the time. It also includes African, so you see European works coming into the collection, those two, as well as the African masks. There are four African masks and a whip that are added into the collection. And then wonderful things like this Cezanne. As part of the agreement, we will share the collection between Fisk and Crystal Bridges approximately every 2 years, so that Fisk students will always have an opportunity to explore and study and be with the collection, no matter what their tenure is at the university. So that's the story. That's the story of Crystal Bridges. Today, the collection totals 2,361 objects, and counting, because I think we acquired something yesterday, so that's probably 2,362. But the collection is only part of the story, as I said. Our vision for Crystal Bridges is to transform lives through experiences that foster the discovery of ideas, expand dreams, and inspire actions. We celebrate our 2-year anniversary in 3 weeks, which means we are just a baby of a museum. So we feel a tremendous amount of pressure and responsibility and pride in what we're doing, but we're really only 2 years old. So a special thank you to Patricia and to all of you for inviting me to be here. It is really a wonderful pleasure to see so many faces that I saw in Bentonville, and also to welcome you and give you an overview here. So thank you very much. So what are the questions? Does anyone have questions? Yes, sir.
What was the size of the hopper?
What's the size of the hopper? It's probably 6 feet wide by 3.5. I don't have the dimensions here, but it's probably 6 by 4-ish. It's pretty large. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Could you say something about the James Turrell sculpture?
You bet. Sure. The question was, could I share something about the James Turrell sculpture? The Sky Space is what it's called, and it was built before the museum opened as an effort to introduce the museum to the community. So James Turrell actually came and sited the Sky Space himself and created, I don't know if many of you are probably familiar with his work, but it's a wonderful homage to the Ozarks because it's got this great rock face on the exterior and a wonderful oculus in the middle to explore light and nature and the effect it has on your mind. So that was well before the museum opened and constructed. So it's open every day at sunset and sunrise, and throughout the day for well, let's just say at sunset and sunrise there are shows. So there's a light experience that's more dramatic during those periods. The space is open all day so that you experience the natural light coming in and changing shadows and lights, etc. So, did you have a more specific question about that?
That's great. We were there that evening and then at 5:30 the next morning. It was just beautiful.
Yeah, it's an amazing space. Do you have a question over here? Yes, sir.
What are your revenue sources?
What are our revenue sources? Now we're getting down to nitty gritty. The museum received a wonderful gift from the Walton Family Foundation that totals $800 million, and that is to support three major things. $350 million goes toward operations, so that supports everything that we do on a daily basis, what we call the cake. And then we have several endowments that are supported by other families that provide what we call the icing, so things that are over and above the basics of the institution, and that totals about another $40 million. $325 million is dedicated to the purchase of art, and then finally $150 million is dedicated to long-term maintenance. And I think what the Family Foundation and Alice Walton saw around the country at the time they were doing this is that museums were in great need of support for non-sexy things. I want to replace the generator, the HVAC system's not working, the roof is leaking. And so, so she wanted to make sure that the institution physically maintained that excellent level forever. And so that's why that was given that way. We also have a very vibrant store and a culinary program that raises about $2 million a year. Yes, sir, in the back.
Going back to the Rose Clinic story, are
Yes.
you able or willing to share with us other examples of how Ms. Walton was trying to acquire pieces that didn't quite fall into her grasp and the community didn't allow it to?
They didn't buy in?
Example
Yeah.
Philadelphia.
There aren't any. I mean, we have the traditional challenges of not being the winning bidder in an auction, so that is often what's happening. But there are the examples that are in the public realm, in the press, are really those that are the odd cases where we were unable to collect something because the community said no. It's a real challenge for us because there was a seller that was interested in selling, and until the situation was brought to light, there was not a desire to buy it until we did. And what we'd love to do someday is borrow the Gross Clinic and show it next to Professor Rand and be able to sort of show them together and create some synergy. But there really aren't any other scandalous. The Fisk situation was one that was a long legal battle because of the Attorney General in Tennessee did not want to see that collection leave the state at any time. And so there was about a 7-year battle between Fisk and the state, not Crystal Bridges, about being able to sell a portion of that collection. And that really went back to Georgia O'Keeffe's desire to give the collection to Fisk. And the university was suffering pretty significantly. And so that was a real challenge that we faced, and I think we've come up with a pretty equitable solution. Do you have a question here? Yeah.
Talk about the tree that's at the entrance.
The tree?
Yeah.
That is Roxy Payne. And it's a dendroid, it's not a tree. If you talk to Roxy Payne, he does not call it a tree. He calls it a dendroid or a dendrite. And it was specifically commissioned for that location, and Roxy and his team came and installed it at the entrance. And it really has become an icon, sort of a very specific indicator that you've entered the museum, and it's really beautiful and wonderful.
Is it stainless steel?
It is stainless steel, and it's grounded for lightning, too. Any other questions? Terrific. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.